He stood in the pouring rain, his two little girls watching like tiny ghosts from the wagon behind him. The sky had split open, and the world was drowning. And in the middle of all that water and mud, he finally said the words that would change everything. Not just for him, but for the woman shivering on the porch. "I need a mother for my girls," he said, his voice cutting through the downpour. "And you need a home." It was a statement, not a question. A cold, hard fact. The rain had been falling for a week straight. It turned roads into rivers of mud and fields into murky lakes. The whole valley felt like it was being held underwater. On the porch of a cabin that was barely standing, a woman sat in a dress made of rags and sorrow. Her hands shook as she held a small sack. It was everything she owned in the world. She was tired. Not just tired from walking, but tired from the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. Tired of the shame people forced on her. They called her the outcast bride. A woman left at the altar, a story told in hushed tones, a life judged by people who never once bothered to learn her truth. But tonight was different. Tonight, a wagon had appeared out of the gray curtain of rain, and the man driving it was just as broken as she was. His name was Elias Carr, a widower, a man whose home was once filled with laughter, but was now so quiet you could hear the floorboards grieve. His wife had been gone for 2 winters, and the cold had never really left his house, or his heart. She'd left him with 2 little girls who were forgetting what a mother's hug felt like. When Elias saw the woman on the porch, he didn't see an outcast. He saw a mirror. He saw someone fragile, but someone still holding on, and that was enough. He pulled himself down from the wagon, his boots sinking into the mud. His coat was soaked through. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. Behind him, his daughters, Sarah and Lily, huddled together, their eyes wide and fixed on the stranger their father was walking toward. He stopped right in front of her. For a long moment, the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain. They just stared at each other, 2 lost souls in a storm. Then, Elias did something no one expected. He knelt, right there in the mud. He didn't offer her pretty words or promises of an easy life. He didn't have riches or flowers. He just had the truth. He reached out and took her hand. It was rough and trembling, but he held it like it was something precious. His voice was raw when he spoke, but the words were solid as rock. "I need a mother for my girls," he said again, softer this time. "And you need a roof over your head." Her breath hitched in her throat. No man had ever spoken to her like that, not with pity, just with raw, brutal honesty. She looked into his eyes, and she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Respect. She shook her head, and the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I'm no good for you," she whispered. "The folks in town, they won't accept me, your girls. They deserve better than me." Elias's grip on her hand tightened, just a little. "My girls don't need what the town thinks is better," he said, his voice firm. "They need someone who will hold them when they have nightmares, someone who will sing them to sleep by the fire. And I need someone who knows what it feels like to be thrown away, because maybe then we can figure out how to start living again. Together." From the wagon, a tiny voice, thin as a bird's, floated through the rain. "Papa? Is she going to come with us?" The woman looked up. That small, hopeful question hit her like a physical blow. It had been so long since anyone had hoped for her. Slowly, painfully, she got to her feet. Her dress was heavy with rain and mud. She looked at the wagon, at the 2 small faces peering out, their eyes full of a terrifying, innocent hope. Then she looked back at Elias. He was still holding her hand. He hadn't let go. And in that moment, the porch, the cabin, the whole world of whispers and judgment just faded away. This wasn't about her past anymore. It was about survival. It was about family. It was about seeing a hand held out in the dark and having the courage to take it. She whispered the words, almost too scared to hear her own voice. "If I come, Will you promise? Promise you won't send me away when they start talking? Elias didn't hesitate. He shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. Let them talk, he said, his voice a low growl. I already lost the love of my life. I'm not about to lose a chance to save what's left of my family. I don't care what they say. In the wagon, the little girl's face brightened with a fragile, beautiful smile, and the woman's tears changed. They weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of relief, maybe even the beginning of trust. Elias stood up, still holding her hand, and together they walked through the mud to the wagon. The girls scooted over, clutching their worn-out dolls, making a space for her. She climbed in, her heart hammering against her ribs. The road ahead was going to be hard, she knew that. But for the first time in years, she wasn't walking it alone. That night, the rain never stopped. But inside the covered wagon, 4 people huddled under a single blanket, creating a small island of warmth in the cold, wet dark. One of the little girls, the youngest one, whispered the word "Mama" into the darkness. She was testing it, seeing how it felt on her tongue. It was a word that was half memory, half prayer. The woman was startled by the sound of it, but through her tears she found a small smile, and she whispered back, "Yes, I'm here." This wasn't some grand romance. There were no rings, no music, no fancy clothes. This was something realer, a vow made in the mud and the rain, a promise to fight loneliness with family, a deal to turn shame into a second chance. And for the outcast bride, it was the moment she realized that the best shelter isn't always a roof. Sometimes it's just the arms of someone who chooses you when nobody else will. She thought saying yes was the hardest part. She was wrong. The real test was just beginning. The real test started the moment the town saw who Elias Carr had brought home to mother his children. The next morning, the rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping. The wagon wheels squeaked and groaned as they cut through the thick mud on the road to town. Elias sat straight and tall, holding the reins, his jaw set like stone. Beside him, his daughters were nestled close to the woman, whose name was Clara. They were all sharing the same blanket from the night before. Clara kept her head down. She stared at her own hands, twisting a loose thread on her sleeve over and over again. She felt like every turn of the wheels was a tick of a clock, counting down to her doom. The dread in her stomach was a cold, heavy knot. When they finally reached the main street, it was like the whole world stopped. Shopkeepers froze in their doorways. People walking down the wooden sidewalks stopped dead in their tracks. It was silent for a second, and then the whispers started. They spread from person to person, like a sickness. That's her. The outcast. What in God's name is Elias Carr doing with her? Elias acted like he didn't hear a thing. He just kept looking straight ahead. But Clara felt herself shrinking. Every whisper was a needle, poking at the old scars on her heart. She had warned him this would happen. She had told him. And now, seeing the looks on their faces, the pure contempt in their eyes, she was terrified that he was already starting to regret his decision. He pulled the wagon up in front of the mercantile. He climbed down, the mud squelching under his boots, and then he turned and held his hand up to her. "Come on," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "If you're going to be a part of this family, you walk beside me, not behind me." She hesitated. Her hand was trembling, but she took his. The little girl scrambled out after her, and immediately they both grabbed hold of her skirt, hiding behind her. The second they stepped inside the store, a heavy silence fell. The air got thick. You could feel the judgment from every corner. Then, a man standing at the counter, a big man with a sour face, muttered just loud enough for everyone to hear. A decent man like Elias Carr, bringing that kind of filth into his home. It's a disgrace. The word filth sliced right through her. It was a physical pain. She started to pull her hand away from Elias's, ready to run. But Elias didn't let go. Instead, he turned to face the man. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp as a razor. "You call it a disgrace," Elias said, his eyes burning. I call it salvation. You best not speak on things you know nothing about." The man at the counter just grunted and looked away, but the message had been sent, and for the first time, Clara understood. Elias wasn't just offering her a place to stay. He wasn't just giving her a roof and a bed. He was willing to fight for her, and that single thought planted something tiny and fragile inside her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't had in a long, long time. It was hope. Days bled into weeks. The little cabin on Elias's land, a place that had been silent with grief for 2 years, slowly started to fill with sound again. The girls' laughter echoed as Clara taught them how to make little dolls from scraps of cloth. The smell of baking bread filled the small kitchen, a scent Elias hadn't realized how much he'd missed. At night, he'd come in from the fields, tired and covered in dirt, and he'd just stand in the doorway for a moment. He'd watch her moving around the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up, a stray piece of hair falling across her face. And something that had been frozen inside him for 2 long winters began to thaw. But their little bubble of peace couldn't keep the world out forever. The whispers in town didn't die down. They got meaner. One Sunday, Elias decided they would go to church, as a family. When they walked in, the preacher, a stern man named Reverend Thorne, stopped his sermon right in the middle of a sentence. Every head in the church turned to stare at them. People shifted uncomfortably in the pews. A few people near the back actually turned their bodies away, presenting them with their backs. It was a deliberate, cruel shunning. Elias just gripped Clara's hand tighter and led her to an empty pew. He would not be intimidated. But Clara felt like she was suffocating. Her heart felt like it was collapsing in on itself under the crushing weight of all that hate. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, she stood by the fireplace, just staring into the flames. Elias came and stood behind her. "Tell me what's on your mind," he said softly. The tears came instantly. They streamed down her face, hot and bitter. "They'll never stop," she choked out. "To them, I'll always be. That woman, the shame. I'm going to ruin you, Elias. I'm going to ruin your girls. Maybe I should just go, before it's too late." Elias spun her around to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Don't you ever say that," he said, his voice fierce. "Do you hear me? My girls need you. I need you. Let the town talk. We'll build a life so strong their words can't touch it. You are not an outcast in this house. Not anymore." Her lips trembled. Do you really mean that?" He reached up and brushed a stray piece of hair from her cheek, his touch surprisingly soft. "I meant it the night I knelt in the mud and the rain," he said. "And I'll mean it on the day they put me in the ground. You're part of this family now, Clara. That's the end of it." For the first time since she was a little girl, she let herself fall. She sagged against him, burying her face in his chest, and she cried. He held her, and it didn't feel like pity. It felt like coming home. But their troubles were far from over. In fact, they were about to get much, much worse. One afternoon, Elias was out mending a fence at the far end of his property. Clara was hanging laundry on the line, the girls playing nearby. Suddenly, she heard the sound of horses. A group of 4 men rode up, stopping just short of the cabin. The man in the lead, the same sour-faced man from the mercantile, sneered down at her. "We told you once," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "We won't have your kind poisoning this town. It's time for you to pack up and leave." Clara's blood ran cold. The girls scrambled to her, clinging to her skirt, their eyes wide with terror. She tried to say something, but her throat was tight with fear. The men just laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Just then, a voice boomed across the yard. "That's far enough." It was Elias. He was striding toward them from the field, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. His face was a thundercloud. The men on their horses shifted uneasily. They hadn't counted on him being so close. But the leader wasn't ready to back down completely. He spat on the ground. This is your last warning, Car." Then they wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and fear hanging in the air. That night, Clara cried again, but this time it was quiet. She was sure she was a curse, a burden that was going to get him killed. But Elias just pulled her closer, his voice a steady rumble in her ear. "They can ride up here 100 times," he whispered. "They're not taking you from me. You're not my shame, Clara. You're my salvation." And with those words, a flicker of hope became a steady flame. She started to believe him. The change was slow, but it was real. The girls started calling her Mama all the time, without any hesitation. A few of their closer neighbors, people who had initially been cold, started to soften. They saw the family at the market. They saw the way Elias's eyes lit up when Clara laughed. They saw how the girls clung to her dress, like she was the center of their whole world. The same people who had been so quick to judge her started to wonder. Maybe they had been wrong. Maybe a story could have a different ending. Months passed. The mud of spring gave way to the green of summer. The cabin, once a house of grief, was now a home. It was full. It was loud. It was alive. One quiet evening, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Elias came to her and quietly placed a small, simple, hand-carved wooden ring in her palm. "You came to me as an outcast," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But to me, to my girls, you were always the answer to a prayer we were too afraid to pray." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She whispered the only words her full heart could find. "I'm home." In that moment, they were no longer a collection of broken pieces. They weren't the widower, the orphans, and the outcast bride anymore. They were a family, bound together not by what the world said about them, but by a love that was strong enough to weather any storm. But a storm was coming, one far worse than just rain, because the town's hatred wasn't just about gossip, it was about a dark secret, a secret that Elias's first wife had died to protect. And now Clara was sleeping in her bed, living in her house, and that secret was buried right there, under the floorboards, waiting. Life settled into a fragile peace. The threats from the town seemed to have faded, replaced by a grudging acceptance from some and cold silence from others. But Clara could still feel their eyes on her back whenever she went to the mercantile. She could feel the weight of Reverend Thorne's stare every Sunday, even though they now sat in the church as a family. It wasn't over. It was just quiet. The real war was being fought inside the cabin walls. Sarah, the older daughter, was 10 years old enough to remember her real mother, Alara, perfectly. She remembered her mother's smell, the sound of her laughter, the songs she used to sing. And every time she looked at Clara, she saw a replacement, an imposter. "You're not my mama," she'd say, her small face hard and unforgiving, whenever Clara tried to brush her hair or tuck her into bed. "My mama is in heaven." Clara's heart broke a little more each time. She tried everything. She was patient. She was kind. She gave Sarah space. But the girl had built a wall around her heart, and Clara couldn't find a way in. Lily, the younger one, was different. She had been just a toddler when Alara died. Her memories were blurry, dreamlike. To her, Clara was the sun rising after a long night. She adored Clara, following her everywhere, her small hand always seeking Clara's. One evening, Elias found Clara sitting on the porch steps long after the sun had set, just staring into the darkness. He sat down beside her, his presence a warm, solid comfort. "It's Sarah, isn't it?" he asked softly. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "She hates me, Elias. I'm trying so hard, but I feel like I'm making it worse. Maybe this was a mistake." "No," he said firmly, taking her hand. "It's not a mistake. You are not a mistake. Sarah's she's protecting her mother's memory. She's afraid if she loves you, she'll be betraying Alara." He sighed. the sound heavy with old pain. I don't know what to do. She was like a saint to this town. Perfect in every way. It's a hard shadow to live in. Clara squeezed his hand. Tell me about her. So he did. He talked for hours, under the blanket of stars. He told her how he and Alara had grown up together, how everyone always knew they'd marry. He told her how Alara organized the church picnics, how she brought soup to the sick, how she could make anything grow in her garden. He painted a picture of a perfect wife, a perfect mother, a perfect woman. And as she listened, a cold seed of doubt began to grow in Clara's heart. How could she ever compete with a ghost? How could she ever be enough? The next day, she decided she needed to understand. She needed to see this woman, Alara, not as a saint, but as a person. She went up to the attic, a dusty, forgotten space under the eaves of the roof. It was filled with old trunks and furniture covered in white sheets. In the corner, she found a small wooden chest. Elias had told her it was full of Alara's things. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside were neatly folded dresses that still smelled faintly of lavender. There was a collection of pressed flowers in a book, a silver locket with a broken chain, and at the very bottom, a small, leather-bound diary. Clara knew she shouldn't. It felt like a violation, a betrayal of the man who had saved her. But she had to know. She had to understand the woman whose ghost haunted her new family. She sat down on the dusty floorboards, the afternoon light filtering through a single dirty window, and she opened the diary. The first several pages were exactly what she expected. Notes about the garden, recipes, sweet anecdotes about the girls. It was the diary of a happy woman. But then, the tone started to change. The entries got shorter, the handwriting more frantic. October 12th. Elias is a good man. He provides for us. Why do I feel like I'm living in a cage? October 19th. Reverend Thorne spoke to me after the service today. His eyes, they make my skin crawl. He acts so holy, but there is a darkness in him. He knows I see it. Clara's heart started to pound. This wasn't the diary of a saint. This was the diary of a woman who was terrified. She kept reading, her fingers flying through the pages. The diary spoke of loneliness, of feeling like a stranger in her own life. And then, she found the entry that made the world stop. November 5th. I told Jacob I can't do this anymore. I love him. God help me, I do. But this secret is destroying me. It will destroy us all. He says we should run away together. Take the girls and just disappear. But I'm so afraid. Elias would be ruined. And Thorne. Thorne watches my every move. Jacob. Clara knew that name. Elias had mentioned him. Jacob was Alara's brother, and he was also the man who had left Clara standing alone at the altar. The diary fell from her hands. She scrambled backwards, hitting the wall of the attic, gasping for air. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. The man who had destroyed her past was tangled up with the ghost who was haunting her present. Suddenly, the whispers of the town, Reverend Thorne's sermons, the men who threatened her. It all started to click into place. This wasn't just about her being an outcast bride. This was a cover-up. But what were they covering up? She forced herself to pick up the diary again, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read. She flipped to the last entry. It was dated 2 years ago, the day Alara died. The official story was that she had slipped and fallen from the hayloft in the barn. A tragic accident. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl. November 28th. Thorne knows. He knows about Jacob. He cornered me today by the well. He said he would destroy everyone I love if I ever spoke a word of what I saw him do. The money from the church fund, it's gone. He took it. He threatened me. He said accidents happen all the time. He's coming to the house tonight to talk to Elias. I have to tell Elias the truth before he gets here. I have to. The entry ended there. Mid-sentence. Clara sat in the dusty attic, the silence screaming in her ears. Alara hadn't fallen. It wasn't an accident. It was murder. And Reverend Thorne, the holy man of God who preached against her from the pulpit every Sunday, was the killer. Suddenly, she heard a noise downstairs. The front door creaked open. "Clara?" It was Elias's voice. He was home early from the fields. She slammed the diary shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't tell him. Not yet. He idolized Alara. The truth would shatter him. And what proof did she have? The ravings of a dead woman in a diary? Thorn was the most powerful man in the valley. It would be her word, the word of an outcast, against his. They would never believe her. They might even think she wrote it herself. She shoved the diary back into the chest, slammed the lid shut, and scrambled down the attic ladder, trying to compose her face, trying to pretend she hadn't just uncovered a secret that could get them all killed. But it was too late. The knowledge was there, a toxic poison spreading through her veins. She wasn't just fighting for her place in a family anymore. She was living in a murderer's town, and he was watching her every move. The weight of the secret was crushing. Clara felt like she was walking on a tightrope over a canyon. Every conversation with Elias was a minefield. He would talk about Alara with such reverence, and Clara would have to bite her tongue to keep from screaming the truth. She'd look at the girls, and all she could see was that they were sleeping under the same roof as a lie, living in a town run by the man who took their mother from them. Her fear made her jumpy. The hoot of an owl, the creak of a floorboard, the shadow of a cloud passing over the sun, it all sent a jolt of panic through her. Reverend Thorne's sermons became unbearable. He would stand at the pulpit, his eyes sweeping over the congregation, and when they landed on her, she could feel a cold, knowing smirk behind his pious expression. He would preach about the evils of sin, of liars and harlots who creep into good families to poison them from within. It wasn't just a sermon, it was a threat. He knew she knew something. He had to. Why else would he be so focused on her? The tension in the cabin was getting worse. Sarah, sensing Clara's distraction and fear, became even more hostile. "You're always whispering," she accused one afternoon. "You're keeping secrets from Papa. My real mama never kept secrets." The accusation was so close to the truth that it stole Clara's breath. That night, she knew she couldn't carry the burden alone anymore. She had to take a risk. After the girls were asleep, she found Elias on the porch, sharpening a knife by the light of a lantern. "Elias," she began, her voice trembling, "I need to tell you something. Something about Alara." He stopped his work, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What about her?" She took a deep breath. She wasn't happy here. Elias's face darkened. "What are you talking about? Of course she was happy. This was her home. We were her family." "No," Clara insisted, her voice gaining strength. "She felt trapped. She was lonely. And she was in love with someone else." He stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden porch. "That's a lie," he said, his voice a low growl. "Who told you that? What wicked gossip have you been listening to?" "It's not gossip," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "It's the truth. She was in love with her brother, with Jacob." The knife fell from Elias's hand, clattering on the floorboards. He stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You take that back," he hissed. "You don't get to come into my home and spit on my wife's grave with your lies. Jacob? He worshipped the ground she walked on, but he was her brother. He was also the man who was supposed to marry me," Clara said, the words tumbling out. "The man who left me at the church. It wasn't a coincidence, Elias. He left me because he was in love with your wife." Elias just shook his head, backing away from her. "No, I don't believe you. You're making this up. Maybe the town was right about you all along. You're a poison." The word hit her like a slap. Poison. The very thing Thorne had called her. He turned his back on her and stormed off into the darkness, toward the barn. The door slammed shut behind him. Clara sank onto the porch steps, sobbing. She had risked everything, and she had lost. He didn't believe her. He hated her. She had not only failed to save him, she had destroyed the one good thing she had in her life. She sat there for what felt like hours, shivering in the cold. She was an outcast all over again. But as she sat there, A new feeling started to burn through the despair. It was anger. Anger at Thorn. Anger at Jacob. Anger at the whole town for letting this happen. And anger at Alara for not being strong enough to tell the truth herself. She would not be silenced. She would not be broken. She stood up, her jaw set. She went back into the cabin, straight up to the attic. She pulled the diary from the chest. She would show it to Elias. She would make him believe her. But when she got back downstairs, she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. It was Elias's voice, raw with fury. Then she heard another voice, a voice that made her blood run cold. It was Reverend Thorn. Clara ran to the window. In the pale moonlight, she could see two figures standing near the barn, Elias and the preacher. Thorn must have seen Elias storm out of the house and followed him. "You need to control your wife, Elias," Thorn was saying, his voice calm and condescending. "She is filling your head with dangerous fantasies, spreading filth about the dead. It is unholy." "She's not spreading filth," Elias roared back, his voice breaking. She told me things about Alara, about Jacob." "Lies, my son," Thorn said smoothly. "The desperate lies of a fallen woman trying to secure her place. She is a serpent in your garden. You must cast her out before she poisons your children as well." Clara watched, her heart in her throat, as Elias stood there, torn. She could see the conflict raging within him. He wanted to believe Thorn. He wanted to believe in the memory of his perfect wife. It was easier than believing the horrifying truth. And in that moment, Clara knew what she had to do. Holding the diary tight against her chest, she slipped out the back door and started running. Not toward the barn, but toward the road. There was only one other person who knew the truth. One other person who could confirm what was in the diary. She had to find Jacob. The journey was a nightmare. Clara ran through the dark woods, branches scratching her face, her feet stumbling over roots. Every shadow looked like Reverend Thorn. Every snap of a twig sounded like someone following her. She was running on pure adrenaline and terror. Jacob lived in a small, dilapidated cabin on the other side of the valley, a good 2 hours' walk. He had become a recluse after he jilted her, drinking away his days, haunted by his own demons. People in town pitied him, but mostly, they just left him alone. She finally saw the faint glimmer of a lamp in his window and stumbled toward it, collapsing against the door and pounding on it with her fists. "Jacob! Jacob, open the door! It's me, Clara!" She heard movement inside, then the sound of a bar being lifted. The door creaked open, and he stood there, silhouetted against the lamplight. He looked older, thinner, his face etched with misery. His eyes widened in shock when he saw her. "Clara? What in God's name are you doing here?" "I know," she gasped, pushing her way inside. "I know everything about you and Alara, and I know how she died." The color drained from his face. He stared at her, then at the diary she was clutching in her hand. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "From her things, from the attic," Clara said, her voice shaking. "It's all in here, Jacob. About Thorn. About the money he stole from the church. About him threatening her. He killed her, didn't he?" He pushed her from the hayloft. Jacob sagged against the wall, his whole body trembling. A sob escaped his lips. "I told her to be careful," he choked out. "I told her Thorn was a dangerous man. She found his ledger, saw how he was stealing from the collection plate, skimming money meant for the new orphanage. She was going to tell Elias. Thorn found out." "He threatened you too, didn't he?" Clara pressed, the pieces clicking together. "That's why you left me. He knew you and Alara were in love. He used it against you. He told you to stay away from me, to ruin my name, so that if I ever suspected anything, no one would believe me. The outcast bride." Tears streamed down Jacob's face. He nodded, unable to speak. "He said he'd tell Elias about us. He said Elias would kill me. He said he'd tell the whole town Ilara was an adulteress, that he'd ruin her name, ruin her memory. She made me promise to protect her memory, no matter what, so I did. I broke your heart to save her reputation." It was all there. the whole ugly, twisted truth. Suddenly, they heard the sound of a horse galloping hard down the road, coming closer. Jacob's head shot up, his eyes wild with panic. "He followed you!" There was a loud bang as the cabin door burst open. Reverend Thorne stood there, his face contorted with rage. In his hand, he held a pistol. "I knew you were trouble from the moment you arrived," he spat at Clara, his holy facade completely gone, revealing the monster beneath. "You should have kept your mouth shut." He raised the pistol, pointing it straight at Clara's heart. "Now," he said, a terrifying smile spreading across his lips, "I'm going to finish what I started." Just as Thorne's finger tightened on the trigger, a shape exploded out of the darkness behind him. It was Elias. He must have followed her. He must have realized she was telling the truth. He tackled Thorne with the force of a grizzly bear, sending them both crashing to the floor. The pistol went off, the shot deafening in the small cabin, blowing a hole in the ceiling. The two men wrestled on the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Thorne was strong, but Elias was fueled by 2 years of grief and a fresh, burning rage. He got the upper hand, pinning Thorne to the floor, his hands around the preacher's throat. "You killed her!" Elias roared, his face a mask of agony. "You murdered my wife!" "She was a sinner!" Thorne rasped, his face turning purple. "She was going to destroy this town, destroy God's work." Suddenly, the cabin was filled with light as a half-dozen men from the town, carrying lanterns and rifles, crowded into the doorway. They had heard the gunshot and come to investigate. They froze, taking in the scene. Elias choking the life out of the preacher, Clara standing with the diary, and Jacob weeping in the corner. "Elias, what is the meaning of this?" one of the men demanded, the sour-faced man from the mercantile. Elias didn't let go of Thorne. He just looked up, his eyes wild. "He killed her," he said again, his voice cracking. "This man, this monster, he killed Alara." The men looked confused, murmuring amongst themselves. They looked at their preacher, a man they had respected and feared their whole lives, and then at Elias, a man they knew to be honest and good. "He's lying," Thorne choked out. "This woman has bewitched him." "No," Clara said, her voice ringing out, clear and steady. She held up the diary. "The truth is right here, in Alara's own words." She opened the book and began to read. She read about Alara's unhappiness, her secret love for her brother, and her growing fear of the preacher. And then she read the final, damning entry. About the stolen money, about Thorne's threats, about his plan to come to the house that night. As she read, the faces of the men in the room changed. Confusion turned to doubt, and doubt turned to horrified understanding. They were piecing together all the strange little things that had never made sense before. Thorne's sudden wealth, his obsession with Clara, his frantic sermons about sinners. When she finished, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Then Jacob spoke, his voice hoarse. "It's true, all of it. He threatened me. He made me destroy Clara's reputation so no one would ever listen to her. He killed my sister because she was going to expose him for the thief and hypocrite he is." The man from the mercantile looked at Thorne, his face pale. He had been Thorne's most vocal supporter, the one who had led the charge against Clara. The shame and guilt on his face were plain to see. Thorne knew it was over. His lies had crumbled. With a final surge of strength, he managed to throw Elias off him and scramble for the dropped pistol. But he never made it. The men from the town, his own congregation, converged on him, grabbing him, pinning him down. The fight was gone. He was just a pathetic, trapped animal. Justice had finally come to the valley, but the damage had been done. They took Thorne away, and the cabin was suddenly quiet again. Elias slowly got to his feet. He looked at Clara, and his eyes were filled with a universe of pain and regret. "Clara, I am so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't believe you. I was so blind." "You loved her," Clara said softly. "You wanted to protect her memory. I understand." He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. He gently took the diary from her hands and placed it on the table. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away the tears. She didn't even realize she was crying. "The night I found you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I told you I needed a mother for my girls. I was wrong. I needed you. Just you. You came into my home, and you fought for my children. You fought for my wife's honor. You fought for the truth, even when I was too much of a coward to see it. You are the strongest person I have ever known." He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperation or convenience. It was a kiss of deep, profound love and respect. A kiss that healed the broken pieces of both of their hearts. In the corner, Jacob watched them, a sad smile on his face. The truth was out, but it had come at a terrible cost. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Clara knew that the whispers were finally over. The ghosts had been laid to rest. The storm had passed. The aftermath was messy. The town was in turmoil. Learning that their spiritual leader was a thief and a murderer shattered their sense of security. There were apologies. So many apologies. People who had sneered at Clara now avoided her gaze in the street, their faces etched with shame. The man from the mercantile came to their farm one afternoon, hat in hand, and stood on the porch for a full 10 minutes, apologizing to Clara and Elias for the way he had treated them, for the threats he had made. Clara accepted every apology with a quiet grace. She held no grudges. She understood that fear and ignorance were powerful poisons, and that Reverend Thorne had been an expert at using them. Jacob left town. He said he needed to find a place where there were no memories. Before he left, he came to the farm to say goodbye. He and Elias stood by the fence for a long time, two men bound by a tragedy they had never understood. They shook hands, a silent acknowledgement of the pain they had both endured. The cabin began to heal. Without the shadow of Alara's sainthood hanging over them, Sarah finally started to open up. One night, Clara found the girl sitting on her bed, crying quietly. "I miss her," Sarah whispered, clutching a small wooden bird Alara had carved for her. Clara sat down on the bed beside her. "I know you do," she said softly, "and you always will. Loving me doesn't mean you love her any less. Your heart is big enough for both." Sarah looked at her, her eyes full of tears, and for the first time, she didn't see an imposter. She just saw Clara. She leaned forward and wrapped her small arms around Clara's neck. "I love you, Mama," she whispered. Clara held her tight, tears streaming down her own face, and felt the last broken piece of her new family finally click into place. Life found a new rhythm, a peaceful one. The days were filled with the simple, beautiful sounds of a happy home. Lily's laughter as she chased chickens in the yard, Sarah helping Clara bake bread in the kitchen, the sound of Elias's steady axe splitting firewood. The town slowly found its footing again, and at the center of it was the Carr family. They had become a symbol not of shame, but of resilience, of truth, of a love that refused to be broken. One evening, a year after that terrible night, Elias and Clara were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set. The sky was the color of a ripe peach. The girls were playing tag in the tall grass, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Elias reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, hand-carved wooden ring he had given her once before. He took her hand. "The first time I gave you this," he said, his voice soft, "it was a promise of shelter. A deal between two broken people. It's not that anymore." He slid the ring onto her finger. "This," he said, his eyes locking with hers, "is a promise of forever. It's a promise from a man who is so completely and hopelessly in love with you. Clara, you saved me. You saved my girls. You saved this family. Will you marry me? Not because you need a home, or because I need a mother for my children, but because I can't imagine a single day of the rest of my life without you in it." Tears of joy streamed down her face as she looked from his earnest, loving face to the two little girls who were her daughters in every way that mattered. She looked at the cabin that had become her sanctuary, the land that had become her home. She had arrived in the middle of a storm, a drenched and broken outcast. And now, she was standing in the warm glow of a perfect sunset, surrounded by love. She threw her arms around his neck and whispered the only word that mattered. Yes. They were no longer defined by their pasts, by gossip or by tragedy. They were a family, forged in the fires of adversity and bound by a love that was stronger than any lie. And they finally understood that home isn't a place you find. It's something you build together. If you enjoyed this story of love, truth, and redemption, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was the most shocking twist for you?